Kathleen, whenever you're ready.
Wonderful. We are so glad to be with y'all this morning. Jax, Lane, and I are here in Nashville, where Vanderbilt University is, and we're excited to share more about our work at Vanderbilt. And we'll open with a land acknowledgement. We collectively acknowledge that Vanderbilt University occupies the ancestral hunting and traditional lands of the Cherokee, Shawnee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Creek peoples. We recognize, support, and advocate for the Indigenous individuals and communities who live here now, and for those forcibly removed from their homelands. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty and will work to hold Vanderbilt more accountable to the needs of American Indian and Indigenous peoples.
All right. So my name is Dr. Lane Walters-Young. I am the Assistant Director of the Caltrainer Program for Moral Leadership at Vanderbilt University. And I received my doctorate in 2019 in psychology and ethics. I studied the intimacy and equity practices of emerging young adults, and I get to put that into practice every day, running a vocational formation and interdisciplinary fellowship program, which is one of the core programs of the Caltrainer program, as well as webinars and other things, which we will be talking about today. Kathleen?
And I'm Kathleen Fuchs-Ritz. I get to serve as the Assistant Director for the Turner Family Center for Social Ventures at Vanderbilt. I've been a part of the center now for 4.5 of its 6 years, and I get to serve alongside student leaders as well as our center faculty and staff directors to create programming focused on business as a driver for social change. And my background is community development, actually, and college access work. So now coming into the space of higher education and working with graduate students allows me to focus in on leadership development. And I'm stepping into the student space again as an executive MBA student at Owen as well. Jax.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jax Collins. I am a recent graduate of Vanderbilt Divinity School with a Master's of Theological Studies. My background is in sociology from the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. I am now working in the Turner Family Center as a program development specialist, kind of in the intersection of higher education. My focus is in programming with a heart for college athletics, and I have helped design programs like Summer Immersion Experience, which was a virtual experience for our student athletes, which I'm excited to talk about with you all later. So we're excited to get started. So with that, Kathleen, you want to move us to the next slide? So today we are going to give you an outline of how these organizations, the Turner Family Center and the Caltrainer program, sharing a key name in the Nashville area, distinguish themselves on Vanderbilt's campus, what kind of work they do and how they do it. And then you'll hear a bit from me and how I moved within these spaces as a student, and we will round out our time with a conversation about topics we found as important to address when we are doing interdisciplinary and experiential learning in higher education spaces. I'll pass it over to you, Kathleen.
Great. So a little bit of context. This is a great photo of Vanderbilt's campus, and you can see the backdrop of Nashville. We are a university of 14,000 students approximately, and about half of that population come from our graduate and professional students. So we have 8 graduate and professional schools, and we focus in on graduate students because both the Caltrainer program and the Turner Family Center have a very specific focus on serving these populations. of students. As a Tier 1 research university with a legacy and focus on producing fabulous graduates, we really feel compelled to think about the aspect of experiential learning and leadership development in particular within our programs at Vanderbilt. And a lot of that stems from our shared Turner funding. So you'll hear about CTP and TFC from us this morning. The T is for Turner, and that's the family that has endowed in the case of the Caltrainer program, and gifted in the case of the Turner Family Center our work. And so the Turner Family Foundation, the Turner family founded Dollar General, and Cal Jr. was its president and CEO for many years. He has a passion for creating opportunities for students to grow as leaders who are moral and ethical, regardless of their discipline or their profession. And that is really a through line in the programming that both of our centers and programs offer. So Lane will share a bit more of the history and a bit of the timeline, and then I'll come back and share more about the Turner Family Center specifically.
Thank you, Kathleen. So the Caltrainer program for moral leadership is over 20 years old. As Kathleen said, it's an endowed program, so its personal gift date and when it started was a little bit different. But Cal gave the money to specifically have interprofessional conversation amongst the leading professional schools. So he wanted it based at Divinity and to have conversations with law and medicine and business. So we have a special mandate to work with the professional students, but we also work with and beyond them. Our longest running program is an interprofessional student fellowship that runs throughout the academic year. It is nomination based. And in that program, we explore the dimensions of moral leadership with the goal of producing better leaders who are able to act upon what they find to be their values. So we do a lot of vocational discernment, encouraging people to identify the moral purpose and values with which they come to their work. But we also, in the course of the fellowship, focus on providing sustained and substantive conversation on those questions so that they can treble the idea of both moral value and vocation toward actualizing it. Because there's research that shows that values and purpose, even at the college level, are not necessarily fully enacted upon without reflective spaces for group conversation. So we provide that. We focus a lot on the identity. We don't try to tell people generally what is moral leadership. We leave it for them. But we do find that there are some consistent themes in which people are interested in having those skill building conversations and opportunities, such as justice, poverty. Poverty and homelessness were both key issues for the Turner family. And since then, we have also focused on education, access to healthcare, and with our executive director, Dr. Graham Reside, focusing on trauma-informed services and how these things relate to the prison system. So the Caltrainer program offers a wide variety of programs. It was intended to work on moral leadership and responsibility with specifically the professional schools, but is wider in scope than that, trying to focus on elevating the conversation, moral leadership amongst the public in general as well. So that answers our first question in the COVID time of doing webinars that are open to students and the broader community. Right now, we're doing a series on what's to forgive, conversations on race, religion, and rhetoric. And we are bringing together a Jewish scholar, a Jewish studies scholar, a Black Christian ethicist, a white Canadian sociologist of religion, and this month coming up, a number of scholars and practitioners on the issue of institutional and intimate violence, specifically around gender-based violence. We also have community conversations on policing prisons. Our executive director is the convener for the Divinity School on the prison and carceral studies and restorative justice concentration. And we also have a partnership with the Society in Conflict webinar that we have created with the National Conflict Resolution Center, which was a former community partner of ours. So we often find that the way we do define morality and pursue moral formation and having these conversations with the public and with students is finding these partners to have these in very different lenses. So each of those settings of the webinars and the partners we have has a slightly different feel to it. And that's part of what we try to do very intentionally in terms of our co-curricular pedagogy. We also try to have some more sustained learning experiences. In the fall, we had a semester-long 12-edition series on Money Talks, Money Walks, Conversations on the Moral Meaning of Money, and it was a combination of practical workshopping tips around moral money literacy for those who might not be in the Owen School or in Peabody education, where there's also a lot of community development education, but allowing for literacy on a conversation in which what it means to be literate in that might be different than offerings other places where financial fitness might be discussed. We also frequently have compassion convenings and retreats and try to engage the arts. So we have some writing for health and healing workshops, and also something Jax will talk about in the future. We try to uplift nonviolent communication and all alternative forms of feedback and response as a key aspect of moral leadership that anyone can engage in, no matter their values and their concerns. We also greatly value experiential learning, and so we try to hold travel seminars. This next year, we have a travel seminar going to study environmental ethics and leadership with Redwoods in the Oregon Extension School. And as I've mentioned before, we also have the Interprofessional Student Fellowship, which is a little unique. It is a nomination-based fellowship, so the deans receive our request every year for nominations, and then students from the 6 schools we pull from are contacted and asked if they would like to be a part of this. And we find that really helpful because one of the things we're trying to do with this fellowship is not simply have people reflect on their own leadership styles and their own ethics, but to realize that ethics, to a certain extent, is a community project and a professional project, and it's not one you do solely by yourself. So these students who are nominated in are recognized by their deans and their assistant deans as people who have potential and interest in moral issues. So they're often students who in law are interested in the death penalty or indigent counsel. We have a few, medical practitioners who went to work specifically with persons of color populations. We have educators who want to do a variety of things in changing what it means to counsel. And so it's a very diverse group that comes together with 18 students, really from around the world and around various aspects of what each of those professional schools do. So we have a number of goals at the Caltrainer program for moral leadership. I would say first and foremost, we work on formation and reflection. We deeply believe in the psychological theory that identity formation is essential to working on the moral purpose in which somebody can cultivate a trajectory of greater moral action in their professions, in their vocations, in their lives. And if you don't spend a lot of time and space on that, there's nothing foundational from which to build, and that it doesn't happen without intention. But we also try to have anybody who comes in contact with our program experience bridging. So they are connected to moral and thought exemplars, primarily in the divinity school that we draw from, but also from other fields. We intentionally bring in moral exemplars for each of the disciplines we draw from in professions to talk with our fellows and others. And experts, when our students design and pick their own moral concern over the course of the year, we try to match them with experts in those fields as well to talk to, specifically about how they've done this work in Nashville. And we also want to help people develop their moral leadership skills in terms of addressing wicked problems that are not, I recently heard this called delicious problems as well, those problems that are juicy and not easy to address that really do require interprofessional collaboration and being nimble and aware that any one path, any one set of skills is not going to have enough of the perspective and the solutions to be able to address things like mass transit in Nashville, which was an issue on concern last year, to be mindful of the vulnerabilities of certain populations in regards to access to healthcare and education, and to really acknowledge the power and privilege they have from their professional training and cultivate the skills of appreciation and curiosity with whomever they're talking with. So as I said, the Moral Leadership Student Interprofessional Fellowship is our longest lasting program, and we draw people from each of the professional schools, actually 6 of them, the ones who most do the human direct services work, so not engineering. And we, for the past couple of years, have engaged them in the mapping system, the Oxford Map, reflecting upon stereotypes, values, and lenses of professional perspective and working on the issue of impact gaps. Because a map is a large thing to do in the context of an academic year. It's unsolvable. We try to have our students sit with that uncertainty and yet thoroughly think through with others the position they have on that map as a particular type of professional mixed in with the others. And finally, we want to support the idea that experiential learning is reflective and deep. And I've already said that we do this with the experiential conversation partners. We bring in people who have been affected by the issues that our students are interested in working with. And this is no easy thing to bring in guest speakers, or as you see on this slide in photos, hold a dinner with people who experience issues of disability payments or caregiving and the labor and issues therein. So we draw on a variety of community connections to connect people. But we also try to realize the connections we already have at hand and spend a lot of time making sure that what we do connect people with is significantly guided, so that it's not just contact for the sake of contact, but contact that is curious, respectful, and transformative. Kathleen?
Thanks, Lane. So I'll focus in now on the Turner Family Center for Social Ventures, which in terms of physical location is housed right next to Lane's space at the Divinity School. We're next door at the Owen Graduate School of Management. And I think here it's worth noting that when we're talking about any interdisciplinary graduate student work at Vanderbilt, we're drawing students out of their specific spaces. I think there's a physical nature to the work that we do. And of course, that largely has been virtual this school year. But I think the work that Lane is doing and the work that we're seeking to do at the TFC is really focused on breaking down some of those silos that certainly exist in higher education at the undergraduate level. We feel a unique level of that when students come to a specific graduate or professional program, that they often feel maybe locked into a particular space and context, as well as what they kind of came to learn. And so I think that's something that's really unique that I'll just echo from hearing more about the way that Lane navigates her programming at the Caltrainer program. And so you'll hear similar threads in our mission for the Turner Family Center. We are an interdisciplinary, student-led organization committed to developing socially and environmentally conscious leaders and doers. And we're really focused in on preparing students to drive systemic and swing for the fences level of change. So our focus is that that change can come through the market. So market-driven forces or enterprise to seek solutions to problems of poverty and social problems more generally. And so, again, similar to the work of CTP, we see ourselves as a hub of resources and of kind of different entities on campus at Vanderbilt, as well as external partners in the community. And so the four really pillars, I would say, of our work are that we are student-led. So we have a student programming board that drives and designs what our program offerings look like in a given year. So student-led, interdisciplinary, again, door is open to that full group of 6,400 graduate school students at Vanderbilt from across those eight specific graduate schools. And the other two pillars are this focus on poverty alleviation and social change with business as a driver for that change. So given that we're housed at the business school, we have a particular focus on thinking about how the market can drive some of the change that we want to see. And we experience that students come to the center really hungry to understand what the frameworks or tools are that they can bring from the private sector or from business generally into public and nonprofit work. But we also very, very much acknowledge that that's a two-way street, and that we have learning from that's needed to solve any of these problems, that it needs to come from across the disciplines, but of course across professions. And the other piece that I just want to highlight here is that we're ultimately focused on developing leaders. That's our ultimate mission, leaders who are moral and ethical in the ways that they approach these problems and see their work in addressing the solutions. So a bit on sort of a long list of programs that we offer at the Turner Family Center. You'll see this kind of robust list, but the focus really in each of them is experiential learning and sort of a scaled approach of what a student can jump into. And Jax will share a personal path of her own, and I'll share a little bit about our engagement model. But first, this is just sort of a snapshot of the menu of options that our students have. We have project-based courses, including social enterprise consulting and project pyramid, which I'll go more in depth in shortly. We have cohort-based programs like Emerging Impact Leaders and our nonprofit board fellows program, which is offered to business students currently. And then we also have sort of an open door series of engagements for students to dive into. Maybe it's just a series of lunch and learns or workshops. We host short-term and longer-term case competitions like the Holt Prize, which I'm sure many have on their campuses as well. And then engaging students in opportunities like office hours or more focused career development sessions. The photo you see here is from one of our last gatherings early in 2020 at our Social Ventures Summit. And that's an annual conference that, again, only comes together because our graduate students are at the helm, and they're the ones setting the pace, selecting the speakers, inviting them to join our students in our community, and really setting the agenda. I think pointing out a specific event that's student-led is important, but it scales up to include all of these programming. So we have a graduate student board of about between 8 and 10 students in a given year who are ultimately accountable for designing and helping execute these program offerings. And so we're really fortunate to have a great crew of students navigating each of our different programs with our relatively small staff of 2+ graduate assistants. One particular program offering that I want to call out here is our newly launched Social Impact Certificate, which is an experiential credentialing of sorts for students who really want to commit to curating and seeking out a set of opportunities within our center, but more fully across campus, focused on social impact, perhaps social entrepreneurship and innovation specifically. So we're piloting the certificate as a non-academic certificate at this point through our center, but that the idea for this certificate and sort of the need or draw for it came from student voice, saying, this is an important piece of my career development. I'm devoting a significant amount of my time, thought, energy to these experiences that are interdisciplinary and focused on social impact. And so they came together to design an opportunity that they would be able to hold up to kind of validate some of those experiences. And I'd love to zoom in here on our Project Pyramid course specifically. So I shared earlier, our center was launched in 2015, so we're in our 6th year. But the origins and actually the initial seed funding that came from the Turner Family Foundation were for our Project Pyramid program. So in 2007, students came together from the business school and divinity schools actually to seek out an opportunity, ultimately to create an opportunity for themselves to learn about social enterprise and at that time specifically microfinance. So Muhammad Yunus, who is a graduate of the Vanderbilt economics department, was recognized as the Nobel Peace Prize winner in that year. And students looked around and realized there wasn't as much conversation about engaging or harnessing the power of business to drive change at a community level. And so with a particular international lens, students came together and created a course and a program that still stands today as the cornerstone ultimately of our center and our work. So in the spring semester, we bring together a group of between 30 and 40 graduate students from across campus, across disciplines. They are paired on interdisciplinary teams to work with an international partner or social enterprise that has operations outside of the US. And in that partnership comes a consulting project. And so our students are working on a team of diverse learners and professionals to put together, to scope and ultimately create solutions or deliverables for a client that is seeking to drive change through business. So there are a few examples of past Project Pyramid projects here. You'll hear a little bit more from Jax about her experience as both a student and now a facilitator of the Project Pyramid program. But I think it's worth highlighting here again that students are involved in every step of the process with Project Pyramid. The course is co-led by our center director and faculty director, who's an Owen professor. But students are involved in designing and implementing the curriculum, seeking out the particular partners or problems that they would like students in the program to address in that year, and actually recruiting and selecting the students who participate each year. So, and of course, I should mention here that a huge draw for Project Pyramid is in the middle of the semester. During spring break, students travel to be with kind of on the ground with their clients and understanding the true nature of the opportunities and challenges that their clients are facing. This is just one more visual before I turn it over to Jax to speak more about her engagement as a student and now an alum of Vanderbilt. But our students put together this pyramid of student engagement opportunities within the Turner Family Center to really highlight this path into leadership. So students often say that they're able to kind of come in the door, enter into the TFC in a variety of ways. That might look like connecting over a coffee chat or coming to a lunch and learn to hear a speaker who's engaged in social entrepreneurship, for instance. But we hope that they don't stop there. Students engage further by dipping their toe in the water, maybe at a pitch competition like the Holt Prize or one that we've designed with a local partner. They may enroll in a course like Project Pyramid or jump into a more in-depth workshop. And then, as I shared, students, a significant group of students take on the leadership of the center and of creating and curating opportunities for their fellow students. And so this is sort of the goal of not only that students would learn, but that they would connect with one another, enhance their networks when they're on campus and beyond, and they would put that to good use and to good work to develop as leaders during their time at Vanderbilt as well. So it is no coincidence that Jax is here with us to share what that looks like, because she's a student that's really an alum, Jax, but as a student was able to really harness and navigate the power of R2 programs and other resources when she was on campus.
Yeah, thanks, Kathleen. So when we were thinking about how we might frame this conversation about student engagement, it was brought up from some previous student conversations about doing an actual mapping conversation to show touch points within each of these organizations. And you can go ahead to the next slide. And so a highlight from both of my time, or this will show just a 2-year period of my time as a student within the Divinity School, but specifically my engagements with these organizations. But one thing to note is I think that my entry point in was my field education component within the Divinity School, which allowed me to play with my experience there, which is the equivalent of a practicum or an internship experience, which was not mandatory for my education, but I opted in to do that, which I was really grateful for. And so one highlight there, which I thought was a beautiful offering of both of these spaces, is that one, there's a lot of room in both of these spaces, and two, a lot of room for reflection. One, the TFC and the CTP offer a ton of programming for both students to broadly engage in, which both Kathleen and Lane have just told you about, these lists of things that they offer for students. This list that I have put before you is my personal list that I've put together of things that I have done, which I think I've rebranded into things that maybe didn't quite make the lists in specific ways. Things like meet with Mario and Oren and student athletes are not things that make it onto the programming list for the TFC, which was just like a personal meeting for us to dream about a programming idea that Mario and I wanted to put together for student athletes, which is part of like a subsection of how the TFC works to make student initiatives happen. And I think that that is a highlight of how Kathleen was talking about is student-driven. And how Lane was talking about earlier with the peacemaker circles, that was something that I heard about through someone through our Facebook group that I signed up for very last minute. One of the last things that I got to do, as you can see, March 2020, where I got to see people in person. And it was a very long weekend. It was very involved, but it was a really moving weekend for me. It was with a bunch of people that I hadn't met before, but were also a part of my program, my educational program, and was offered to us free of charge. And yeah, it's something that I take with me. And we got these certificates at the end, and it's actually on my fridge at home. So all of that to say, the second highlight that I said, there's a lot of room for reflection. As a divinity student, I told Lane and Kathleen this, there's plenty of space for reflection in my actual degree program, arguably too much as a divinity student. But the programming that I found in these spaces were what I have termed as application-based reflection, processing in real time. What do I mean by that? This was types of reflection that I was using in job searching, interviews, networking meetings, system thinking, how I was restructuring my free time to volunteer with organizations, things of that nature, as opposed to writing out a reflection paper and wiping my hands clean of a class. So I thought there was a lot of intention in those spaces for how I was reflecting on experiences. The last thing I'll highlight on this slide is the longevity in relationship. This mapping is, of course, over 2 years of my time as a student. I think this is important, whether you're working with undergraduates or graduate students, that some of my most valuable experiences were in my undergraduate career were times I can point to, or when I worked for a long time with professors or community members, and there are still projects that I keep up to date with in Charlottesville because they're important to me. And this dynamic with my team now, as I've carried over to working with Kathleen still, there's an intention or an intentional decision for us to invest in each other. And I think that's a lot of work, but it's the kind of work that feels good. And I think that it's the part that makes this next slide make a little bit more sense. So as I worked through my interactions with the TFC and the CTP, as impactful as those engagements were, I felt a little bit phony putting a slide together that looked so clean and linear, and to be transparent, the way that I even remembered that I did half of those things over the past 2 or 3 years was to scroll through my Google Photos. Some of those things I didn't even remember that I did until a photo popped up, and that was a fun, beautiful, sad journey now that we can't gather the same way. And this is what that really clean linear journey really looked like. So I didn't try to pretend to draw a squiggly line all through that journey, but I will give you a brief flyby version, and you can draw your own version in your mind. So while I was engaging in these spaces at school, I started divinity school with the intention to get a PhD in sociology of religion post-graduation, as Lane laughs because most divinity students intend to get a PhD after they graduate. And in my first few months, I reconsidered my PhD. I attended my first Vandy football game. I got eye surgery. I attended churches. I disliked the churches. My brother got engaged. I submitted my first exegesis paper. I completed Whole30. I applied to summer internships. I ran a half marathon. I worked at Notre Dame. My dad ran for local office. I organized Divinity School's first ultimate Frisbee team. My mom came to town. I took care of my brother's new puppy. My best friend got engaged. I officiated my brother's wedding. studying. And then I went to Mexico City for Project Pyramid, and then the world shut down. And that is all of the icons going on around that clean, linear line from before. So something to name here is that in the midst of all that was going on, and all that I was experiencing outside of these spaces, is that while I was working in the TFC, I was really working within these two buckets. One, my fielded journey was that I essentially was working on a year-long project helping to design a program called Business Fellowship for Student Athletes, which would gather student athletes from around the country for a stay-in personal and professional development program. I worked on a team with an executive education professional, an international education policy professional, and the director of our center, Kathleen's counterpart, Mario. And this was foundational for me to continue working with the TFC now, as well as me to continue my designing programming with student athletes. And then secondly, as a student, I was involved in what Kathleen mentioned earlier and what I just mentioned, Project Pyramid. So I was involved in an interdisciplinary team involving a nursing student, MBA student, Latin American studies, global health student, and an international education fellow, and myself, a divinity student, a hodgepodge of a team. And we worked with a Mexican honey-based beauty line social enterprise company called Abeja Reina, which means queen bee. We were consultants for Abeja Reina over the course of the semester, and this experience was important to me, not only to work across disciplines, which is a highlight of Project Pyramid, but for me personally, it was to develop this translation skill of what I would call an interprofessional vocabulary. Being a divinity student, our degree is sometimes really selective and unknown to people, and I found now that I'm working with a number of business school professors to be very valuable that I have a common language, and that's not a barrier for me any longer. And secondly, I was a point person with our client and my team, and for a number of reasons, this was a great experience for me. Being the youngest on my team, I gained a huge exposure to project management skills and working across cultures, things of that nature. To round out that experience, I was then able to implement my feedback, like Kathleen said, and now this year I am working to facilitate Project Pyramid. And yeah, I'm just really thankful to be able to put my own flavor on Project Pyramid, as we are not traveling this year, but giving it my own feedback. And with that, I am going to pass it over to Lane to transition to our last portion.
Sure. So we thought that we would end our time together with some candid conversations around three aspects which we find most compelling and problems that we are still trying to address and solve. But before we do that, we wanted to open up the floor to our audience and see if there were any questions people wanted to ask of what we've presented so far. Given the Attendify platform, if you have a question, please go ahead and type it into the chat, and I will read it and give us time for the three of us to answer it if you have that. And as I'm allowing for a little bit of time to see if people have questions in the audience, I'm going to say that our presentations thus far have been to talk about experiential learning as transformative and developmentally keyed to be understood as an apprenticeship that is of duration and of holism, of focusing on the experiences somebody has outside of the classroom. Like Kathleen was saying, business students were already doing so much co-curricular work that they wanted a credentialing, a sort of way of putting it all together. And that is some of what we do as well at the Caltrainer program in terms of helping people think through what they're already doing outside the classroom and also balance that out. I am not seeing any questions come up in the chat, so I think we will continue on and describe a little bit more about what it's like to experience as an institutional staff partner, what it's like to do this work. So you're seeing here that we have a circus and that we are the ringmasters of this circus. And this came to us as a metaphor for what we do, specifically because we leave so much of our programming and our staff support to supporting the student-led initiatives, like Kathleen was saying about the social impact certificate, about what Jax did regarding the student athlete business development initiative. All of those things came about because we very intentionally leave some room for different acts of the circus. As I was saying earlier, each of our partners have a different flair to them. They often drive the programming. There isn't a grand central strategy in which we slot people in so much as we seek to see who's having a conversation at the moment. The moral meaning of money is a certain heart of mine, and one that I have found working with divinity students over many years. That's something that they don't have on hand, whereas the level of reflection we do have in divinity school, as to Jax's point, sometimes too much, we can offer to other schools and other professions who focus so much on the expertise and the success that they don't have room to think through the moral questions in a space that is apart from their advisors and their fellow classmates, so that gives a level of authenticity and privacy and support. We bring people who are very diverse in backgrounds, but very like-minded in hoping for the world to be a better place. So it does feel a lot like a circus, and it has three main parts to it as well. But it also feels like a juggling act, both as institutional staff and also what we think graduate students experience as graduate students, and also what they're being tasked to do when they leave us and enter or re-enter the professional world full time. So we have this image of a guy juggling on a high wire. He's all by himself. I asked Jax and Kathleen whether or not they liked this image, and Jax said yes, because that is how it feels, that you're all by yourself. One of the things we really focus on is the connection and collaboration that can be done in community. But we try very hard, and one of the reasons why we changed from a former model of working with community partners in sort of a consulting manner, very similar to Project Pyramid, with our fellows, was that it wasn't a class, it was purely co-curricular, and there just wasn't enough time on anybody's end to support that juggling act appropriately, because ultimately students are still individuals who come with their own histories and their own past and their own trajectories going through. So acknowledging that reality and not trying to shy away from it, how do we best provide that guidance and that support? And what are they trying to learn how to be ethical and moral leaders for? To what end? So our question is, how do we best prepare innovative moral leaders to develop and pursue their moral compass in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world? And I'm just going to leave that up there as something we try to do in advance to the next slide.
So bringing that question forward into the next section, I think we really intentionally selected the word candid to describe these conversations and these questions, not only because we think it's important to bring to a setting like this one, but because it's really essential in the work that we do at Vanderbilt, that we bring that candor into each of our conversations. We sometimes jokingly, even in a group of new students introducing themselves, we set a no acronym rule, because we realize, and as Jax highlighted this, for this kind of cross interprofessional translation abilities, that even starts with how we identify ourselves as a student in the MPH program or an MTS degree that we're seeking. And some of those, some of that candor can look like we're snapping our fingers and saying, nope, no acronyms. What do you mean? What do you mean? Right. So we like to ask why and ask clarifying questions a lot to ensure that we aren't being exclusive or kind of creating, I guess, laboring under assumptions that maybe all students, as well as staff and faculty, don't necessarily share. So that's a really critical ingredient, that candor within the interdisciplinary groups and spaces that we're seeking to create. So to continue this metaphor of the circus, and we hope that that gets a laugh and probably some resonance of what this work looks like in bringing together change-making work with a variety of resources and audiences at an institution of higher ed. So we wanted to focus in on three figurative circus rings, and those are the partners, the external partners specifically that we bring into the work, the students, of course, and also the university, sort of that institutional ring. And I'll focus in on the questions that we've outlined here next, but first want to acknowledge that each of these circus rings or spaces have a tremendous amount of variability in terms of their size, their significance, and that fluctuates by the day. When we're thinking about one particular program, external partners might be essential. And when we think about another, we might, that student circle expands a lot bigger. And there are other conversations or days when the focus on university administration and seeking that buy-in for experiential learning is really, really important. We know that there's a balance and that there's a harmony that's required for these circus rings or these resources and partners to dance in. But we want to focus in on these specific questions we've outlined because we think they're worth a little bit more examination and candor. And so to focus in on, I'll just read each question on this slide and then we'll advance to focus in on each one. So with partners, what are experiences that you host at your university that bring experiential learning to students that do not involve partners? For the institutional level, how do we engage in discussion on the value of experiential learning in institutions of higher education, particularly those with a significant research focus like ours at Vanderbilt? And for students, how do we listen to and respond to student interest and needs when designing and implementing programming? We feel like these are essential questions that we ask ourselves to remain in that state of reflection, refinement, and focus on how we're delivering on the mission and commitments of each of our centers and programs. So to begin here, and Lane has alluded to this a little bit in the Caltrainer program's approach to bringing in external partners. What are experiences you host that bring experiential learning to students that do not involve partners? Another way of saying this, or a way that we as a group have thought about this topic, is what is the balance of learning, experiential learning, that we can entrust to or outsource in some ways, outsource to partners, and really focusing on where we might be overvaluing external partners as a necessary or essential piece of experiential learning. So Lane will share a little bit more in depth about how the Caltrainer program has approached this question, and Jax then will speak about a particular component of the Project Pyramid course that she's designed around this question.
So yeah, thank you, Kathleen. I alluded to this a little bit briefly, saying that we had recently switched our model of community engagement with our student fellowship, and that is the case. I have worked for the program for a year and a half. Started before I actually got my dissertation defended, and it was made as a decision that the consulting model that had been going through was just unevenly implemented for a whole variety of reasons. That while it would be lovely to have a class structure, when it's Project Pyramid, it's a business class, a university course that everyone's allowed into. To require something of such intensity and duration, strictly co-curricular, is a juggling act. And it was decided that it was better to focus on guiding the students through that reflection, because even within the 18 students we have currently this year, those conversations that, as Jax called that, translation skill of interprofessional language, is something that our students don't come with. They don't even necessarily know how to define their profession or their domain within each of the schools. For instance, the Peabody School of Education and Community Development has typically an educational counselor, somebody who wants to do higher ed administration, possibly a teacher, and somebody who wants to do community development. And they are asked to consider themselves as one profession. And they often have to figure out what that domain looks like, then address the stereotypes and the benefits and the code of ethics of that profession. And that's one of the hardest sessions that they even find that they have. So to repeat again, I think pedagogically we find that to put people in community sites. So to say that we don't ever have partners is a bit of a falsehood. We always have partners. But the classic model of community partners in which student teams go physically to other spaces and have little interaction from the program that is sending them, such as the Caltrainer program, is the question that we have more recently revised. Because what we found was the community partners that we had selected, vetted, trained, supported, still were not in the position to be the teaching faculty that we hope for. We are the experts in reflective guidance. And so we decided to focus on that and focus on the process of reflection, the process of that interprofessional translation and discussion as what we were able to successfully and more evenly accomplish over the course of it. But that's also something that can be done. I'm teaching a course on moral leadership for talented and gifted young teenagers, not young adults. And they too have sort of a core curriculum, and then they each have a moral concern that they follow up on. And so they are asked in their final project to have a conversation on their issue with their peers that they've been studying with all semester. And really recognizing the diversity and the perspectives and holding a conversation across strangers who become friends or strangers who are strangers if it's a public conversation. Those very basic skills are ones that are super important to uplift as experiential learning, besides just putting contact hours in a community setting. Jax?
Yeah, thanks for that, Lane. So I think it is important, that phrase that you said, that we always bring partners with us in this way. That's how I view this question when thinking about how we're bringing partners with us in the Writers Round assignment that I've designed for our Project Pyramid class this year. So as I mentioned, Project Pyramid is not traveling this year, given the circumstances. And I also did not want to task our students with a book club for a few selfish reasons, mostly that I didn't want to pick the book for them to read. I didn't want the pressure that they would read it and hate it, or have already read it and that it not be useful. And then there's a fiasco of them voting on things that's just all too much. And so instead, I designed a assignment where it's putting the responsibility back on them to, it's like a reverse book club without calling it reverse book club. So I named it Writers Round in true Nashville fashion, which is when get together and sing their songs together. Mm-hmm. So at the beginning of the semester, they wrote out their learning goals and for the semester, and their learning goals were to guide the material that they were to bring each week to this book club type discussion. So each week there's a leader of their group that brought a resource to their group, and everyone in their group would read it. And then in class, there was designated time for them to discuss the resource. There was also an intention for them to pick resources that were not readings. Graduate courses are often reading heavy to give their brain a little bit of a break. That was not required. But in the same line of bringing partners, just as a quick example, so that we can move to the next question, one of the resources was about cruise lines and the damaging nature of sending folks off to basically doing some colonizing-ish type work with this cruise line, and it was all a little bit sticky, but there was this really rich discussion within the group. And one of the reflection the business school's on quarters, so they just finished their first quarter. The class itself works as a semester, but they'll have a midpoint quarter check-in. So their first reflection paper, one of the students said, I've never thought about something so much before from someone else's perspective. And these are graduate students. The student was, I think 27 years old. And so it was really cool to see that they had thought about something differently, not only from the article, but also from their peers. And so your peers become a sense of a partner, as well as the resources that they're encountering, things like that. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. I love that example, Jax. And I think the Writers Round has been a really rich way of ensuring that we're delivering on student expectations, which are high and diverse, again, particularly if we are saying come from each direction of campus. We're each coming together to that Writers Round with a perspective on what's valuable and what not only what we want to learn, but what we want to share. So I think that's been a really powerful tool to encourage that peer leadership and peer learning. As we move into the next area, the next circus ring, if you will, it's of course you could think about it as the main ring, which is our university or our colleges, and so I think in terms of bringing in from the past question this idea of how experiential learning works, whether it's peer-led, staff-led, or kind of shared with external partners, our university contexts often require that we sort of validate the work of experiential learning in the ways that it pairs with our academic priorities within the university. So this question of how do we engage in discussion on the value of experiential learning in institutions of higher education, particularly with a significant research focus. I think at Vanderbilt, we see probably like other institutions, sort of some variability or maybe even a pendulum that swings of a particular program or department really endorsing this way of learning and then the pendulum can swing and say, we really need to kind of contain or be thoughtful about how we're offering experiential learning, or maybe outside of the classroom learning. Vanderbilt's made a tremendous commitment to experiential learning for its undergraduates. We have an initiative called Immersion Vanderbilt that is actually requiring undergraduate students to have some level of experiential learning baked into their transcripts. And so that's exciting. I think we're fortunate at the business school and the divinity school to have deans that are really endorsing and lifting up this work that we're doing within our programs. But we know that embracing kind of faculty support is key to the success of our programs. So just one particular example for us within the TFC, I mentioned that Project Pyramid, the course has a sort of an application and selection process for students to participate. And we're fortunate this semester to have a PhD candidate in the course, but we had more PhD candidates and students apply for the course and who were ultimately selected, but needed to withdraw because of kind of tension or concern within the graduate school, within their program, and their advisors kind of understanding the value of where Project Pyramid would fit into their research, their professional goals, and whether or not that would perhaps distract from their work within the academy. And I think we have an equal, if not greater, examples of where this really does align. And we have advocates and champions on campus who do want their graduate and professional students to engage in experiential learning and interdisciplinary work. But we know that can be work that both we as staff as well as students need to be advocating for on an individual and programmatic basis. So Lane can shed a little bit of light on this as well from her personal background.
Yes, from my personal background, I chose to work for the Caltrainer program very intentionally because of the experiential focus and the goal and commitment to marrying theory and practice more closely together through the peacemaking circle, which is the nonviolent communication I mentioned earlier. A lot of the reflection that divinity faculty are trained to provide and facilitate for their students is this idea of what you're coming in, what your ideology is, your faith background, how you view your sacred texts and the world around you, evaluating your past for the future, but often it can feel very macro level. And so pretty much anybody who comes in for divinity, or like Jax did for more of a Master's of Theological Studies general background for advocating for social change. A lot of our people are chaplains or nonprofit leaders in engagement. Many people want to do a PhD, but then discover just how focused it is on new knowledge rather than disseminating or working with the general public on the knowledge that we already have that is best practices. So one of the reasons why Jax said that she finds application reflection so useful is because we very intentionally take all the resources we have and try to make sure that that heart and that head and that future orientation and that meso and micro level is sometimes more addressed than they get in their classes because they need that big reflective, let's question everything we've had and get tons of very specific expert knowledge. But to really make that leap from having that knowledge to applying that knowledge and making a difference in the world requires other ways of experiential learning that often needs to be there, but is not the primary focus of an organization like Vanderbilt, whose first goal is to create new knowledge. but the dissemination of it is just as important.
That's such a beautiful way of putting that, Lane. Thanks. So to that point of to whom are we, or for whom are we creating and disseminating that knowledge? I think our students are central. I know our students are central to the why that Jax and Lane and I share of why we come to this work. And this question is the one we'll close with, of how do we listen to and respond to student interest and needs when designing and implementing programming. And this one is one for us to leave to you all to continue to consider. I think one particular nugget that we like to ruminate on at the TFC is that higher education is one of the only places where students come in as both customers, but they leave as products. And I think that we would be remiss not to engage those students as ringleaders, to come back to the circus metaphor, to design, experiment, and really execute on their questions, not only to bring them, but to practice what answers or solutions might be worth pursuing. And so as we look to conclude our time together today, we know that this kind of tension or opportunity, as we see it, of harnessing student power despite their turnover through our institutions, we are thankful to have built cases and curricula around putting students at the center of this work and really ensuring that they are the ones who will contribute to and benefit from their design.
Thank you so much for spending your time with us. We look forward to those who will be listening to our recording, and our contact information is available on the last slide. Please reach out to us if you have any questions about our program. We'd be happy to hear from you and talk.
Thank you so much.